Hello and welcome. These are the builds that I use when I'm speed playing on Hazard 5. For those that just want to know the builds, I'm going to show them all pretty quickly, and for those that kind of want a little bit more detail on how I use it, I'm going to show that after. We're starting off with Scout, and this is my general Scout build, and I'll use this in every single mission type apart from Sabotage and Elimination missions. And this is the Scout that I use in Sabotage missions. And finally, in Elimination missions, I will use this setup. And I normally use Hipster when I'm solo. And in a team, and we're not using conductive thermals, I'll use this. And when the team wants to use conductive thermals, this is what I have on my thermals. And I will change the fear to fire. These are my driller builds. And this is what I typically use for cryo. And then also on this slot thing, I have this combo. And all my EPC builds are built like this, just so charge times on it are consistent. And then, yeah, another fire build. Yeah, EPC, this exact same as before, look. And then I'll also use goo in this combo. If I do use Sabata, it is like this with the goo as well, because you can't remember the exacts of it now, but there's some bug with it where you can shoot through like any armor. And then got sticky fuel as well that I'll use. Yeah, that's my general builds. And next up, this is the driller that I will use on Caretaker missions. Essentially, like, the only difference is that I use heat. And then, yeah, again, it's the same EPC setup. And of course, instead of the normal C4s, I have the double damage. And finally, this is what I use on driller for Dreadnought missions. I will use this solo in multiplayer and if there's a conductive thermal scout, because this, even then the slow is still helpful. Okay, next up is NG, and this is my general engineer build. Well, one of them. The other one is the same primary, but with roll control instead, just because it's better at dealing with jellies and swarmers and flying things like bees. And next up we have the build that I would use on a Caretaker mission with NG, and yeah, it is the same explosive chemical rounds build. You could probably see a theme with that. And yeah, I'll use feedback loop. If we are lacking a, what's it called, a yellow guy driller, I'll use Fat Boy and just blast the top of the Caretaker with that. Something else that I'll use is this. And yeah, to be fair, this is a good general build as well, to be fair. You could probably use this anywhere. This is what I use on Dreadnought missions with NG. I'll typically use this combo when there is a cryo driller. And I'll use this one when there isn't. Gives you a little bit more freedom. And then there's also the breach combo. Like, breach allows you to shoot at the Dreadnought from any angle. And then also with breach, I might use cycle overload with the shotgun, or stubby with hyper alloy. And then lastly, if the scout is using conductive thermals, I'll just use my general build from earlier because Inferno Breach does a lot of damage against conductive thermal dreads. Last but not least is Gunner, and these are my general builds for him. So we've got this combo, Burning Hell with Triple Tech and a Necrothermal. We've got this combo, Bullet Hell and Hellfire. If there's a cryo driller, I'll use this. Or I'll just use Hellfire even though we've got a cryo driller, because why not? Oh yeah, we've got this. And then yeah. And then the final build that I would use is this combo. I will generally bring this combo to Caretaker missions. Before I show you general tips on how I use those builds, I want to make you aware of the Buildomicon that I've linked in the description. In the Buildomicon you can find the most well-known and accepted builds that work in most situations in modded difficulties. They should also work in Has-5 for the most part as well. One of the main differences between Has-5 stuff compared to modded difficulties is that you're not pressured as much to stick to the class roles. There's not as many stationaries or other high value targets you have to kill, and as a result you can get away with having a more crowd control centered build on Scout, for example. And now I've said all that, here's a general idea of how I use each of my builds. With my general Scout build, I will prioritise shooting things like Macteras or Spitters, whilst also using the aggressive venting to keep the grunts away. Regular grunts will die from the aggressive vent, so you want to prioritise shooting grunt guards or slashers, or whatever grunts aren't going to be in range of your aggressive vent. I'll try to mostly use Bosco's cryo rockets to freeze things like spitballers and save my cryo grenades for Praetorians. In a multiplayer lobby it's the other way around. I'll use my grenades on stationaries like spitballers, and a teammate will normally just kill the Praetorians or oppressors or whatever. On the sabotage build, I use drak to heat up the turrets and the patrol bots. I also use the shotgun to stun, as well as helping with wave clear alongside the boomerang grenades. With the scout Dreadnought build, I use blow through on both weapons as wave clear, so try and line up enemies a bit. The Mark for Death build is similar as well, except you mark the bigger enemies so everyone does more damage. All of the driller builds work in a similar way. You put fire, ice or goo on the floor, which gives you the space to use your secondary weapon or progress the mission. The driller Dreadnought build also works in a similar way, except for killing bigger enemies and Dreadnoughts, you use normal shots to damage. With my general engineer build, I use the explosive chemical rounds for wave clear and also shooting faraway targets. I will also then use the breach to damage and stun high priority targets like Praetorians. And using the plasma trail on the breach, I will also kill the swarmers and jellies. When I'm engineering sabotage missions and there's no driller, I bring Fatboy to shoot above the Caretaker and damage the vents. Another tip with Fatboy is using platforms to maximise the radiation damage zone, and putting a lure in the radiation to lure bugs into the radiation. The Executioner and Volatile Impact Reactor build is another general build and can be used anywhere. You use it in a similar way to Driller by using the ground fire to kill bugs before they get to you, whilst using Executioner to pick off bigger enemies. In Dreadnought missions, I'll use the grenade launcher build when there's a cryo driller. When Dreadnoughts are frozen you can do bigger chunks of damage, which can allow you to skip damage phases. Explosive chemical rounds is the wave clear weapon in both the PGL and Shard build, but the Shard can also be used for wave clear, so because of that it's more flexible. The breach cutter is useful on Dreadnought missions because it allows you to damage the Dreadnought from any angle. Because it's also a good wave clear weapon, you might be more comfortable using the other two primaries with it. So, with the Hurricane and BRT build, it's basically a stun and gun playstyle. I will shoot grunts with the Hurricane until they're dead, and with bigger enemies, I'll stun them with the missiles and then use a BRT. With the bullet hell and hellfire build, the biggest tip is don't forget the gun is still a minigun. Shooting the floor means you lose that on damage. If you shoot the higher health enemies like a Praetorian first, the low health enemies around them will die. If bugs get behind you, then you can jump and shoot the floor, but only shoot when you're in the air. This means you won't shoot yourself when the bullets ricochet. If you're starting to get overwhelmed or are getting overwhelmed, then use the coil gun to fear enemies. When there's a cryo driller, use the lead spray BRT for your secondary. Use that for killing frozen large enemies, and bullet hell for shooting low health enemies like grunts. With the burning hell and coil gun build, a tip on triggering the necrothermal catalyst is shooting grunt guards that are on fire, and maybe slashes if you're quick. Macteras are good for triggering the effect too, but normal grunts will just die before you can shoot them most of the time. For higher health enemies, I will blast them with a coil gun and maybe finish them off with the minigun. And finally, the Leadstorm build with Hellfire. With this build, you shoot stuff with minigun, and when there's too many enemies for you to individually shoot one by one, you use your coil gun to fear everything away, and then repeat. Fearing enemies away from teammates might be appreciated too. In Caretaker missions, the heat from the coil gun will destroy turrets, and the minigun can cook both turrets and patrol bots. And yeah, that about sums everything up. Thank you for watching and being patient whilst I made this video. It took a lot longer than I thought it would to make. Yeah, thank you and bye.
When I saw what your punch was capable of, I knew immediately that I had to study under you as your disciple. If only I could be as strong as you have become. Such awesome power. I have an old enemy who must be defeated at 4. I need incredible strength.